Well, hello, everybody, and thank you so very much for joining us. This is Ebenezer Everywhere. We have a few folks who've gathered in the sanctuary, but most of us are online as we continue our leadership series. We're very serious about leadership development here at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And if you've already tuned in, tell somebody that we're on live now. They can find us at ebenezeratl.org. You can find us on YouTube or on Facebook. Today we're blessed to have a conversation on leadership with two of my favorite people and two of the most impactful leaders that I know. They're both members of Ebenezer Baptist Church, Renee Glover and Chris Womack, and I'm going to introduce them more formally in just a moment. But of course, we begin all things here with prayer. Will you bow with me in prayer? Gracious God, we give you praise and thanks for this day and for this moment. We thank you for meaningful conversations. We trust that through the time that we spend together, engaging one another and listening to you, we might be transformed and made new creatures in your sight. Through Jesus Christ our Lord we pray. Amen. Amen. Thank you all so much. Again, tell folks that you've tuned in with Ebenezer. You can find us on ebenezeratl.org. Tell them that they can also find us on our YouTube channel or on Facebook. So part of what we do with our lay leadership here at Ebenezer Church is that we have quarterly lay leadership development sessions. And today's conversation is focused squarely on the question of leadership. And we certainly need leadership in a moment like this. This is a leadership moment. And we've seen what happens when there are good leaders in place. We've also seen how devastating the consequences are when you don't have good leadership or when leadership does not show up in a responsible way. I think that part of the story of this pandemic, in which we've lost over 1 million Americans, part of that conversation is a conversation about leadership. But I want to introduce two amazing folks that I admire a great deal. They're both members of Ebenezer Church. And even though I know them both well, if you don't mind, I'm going to read a little bit from their bio because there's so much here, and I won't read it all, but want to make sure I lift up some of the important things. Renee Lewis Glover is the founder and managing member of the Catalyst Group, LLC. She is an inspiring and purpose-driven thought and business leader known internationally for changing the conversation about public and subsidized housing and economic development. For 19 years, she was the chief executive officer of the Atlanta Housing Authority. This is a quasi-governmental real estate and economic development agency organized under the laws of the state of Georgia. Renee sponsored the formation of numerous public-private partnerships to develop more than 16 mixed-use, mixed-income residential communities, leveraging public funds by a 10-to-1 ratio, impressive, with a $3 billion economic impact. When you talk about reimagining public housing or what we do to serve the poor, Renee has been a transformational leader in that space. Prior to that life, she's been a corporate lawyer at 2 major firms in New York and in Atlanta. She serves now on several boards: Tricon Residential, Fannie Mae, Enterprise Community, and she has also served on a number of for-profit, not-for-profit, and civic boards, including the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Habitat for Humanity International, and the University of Pennsylvania Institute for Urban Research. She's such a quiet and unassuming person. You wouldn't know that you're sitting next to such a powerhouse. Let's hear it for Renee Glover. Pleased also to say hello to another member of our church. He is the chairman, president, and CEO of Georgia Power since 2021. Chris Womack leads Georgia Power in serving its 2.6 million customers across the state, and that company is the largest subsidiary of Southern Company, one of the nation's leading energy providers. Prior to his current role, he served as Executive Vice President and President of External Affairs for Southern Company, where he led overall external positioning and branding efforts, including the company's public policy strategies. And he oversaw the company's governmental and regulatory affairs, corporate communication initiatives, and other external and strategic business engagements. He is a native of Greenville, Alabama. I first met him years ago when we were both members of 6th Avenue Baptist Church in Birmingham. Chris Womack is an amazing leader. Prior to joining Southern Company, he worked on Capitol Hill for the United States House of Representatives in D.C., where he served as an a legislative aide to Congressman Leon Panetta, and as staff director for the Subcommittee on Personnel and Police for the Committee on House Administration. He currently chairs the board of Eastlake Foundation and is on the Georgia Ports Authority Board, the National Board of the First Tee, and the Georgia Historical Society Board of Curators. What an amazing leader, graduate of Michigan University and American University and the Stanford Executive Program. Also very active in our church. Let's hear it for Brother Chris Womack. Thank you. So folks read, hear all of this amazing information about you and your roles. And what's incredible about both of these people is that you've served in both the private and the public sector. And so you have a sense of engaging those two sectors. But before we get into that, and today's conversation really is all of us have to show up as leaders in some sense. So you don't have to be the executive or to be focused on that as a trajectory for this conversation to be meaningful for you. All of us have to lead in some way. Even if we're parents, we have to lead, right? I had to get a 5-year-old and 3-year-old out the door this morning, and I wasn't sure who was in charge, me or them. Leadership shows up in many, many different ways. I want to start talking about your faith, because both of you are grounded in that. And so whichever one of you would like to go first, I want you to talk about your relationship with God, maybe starting from your earliest days, whenever it is you made that decision to follow Christ, and how that informs your work as a leader.
Renee, let me defer to you.
Well, this is such an important question, so thank you for it. It's also a very personal question. And when I first connected with even an understanding of God and faith, I was a fairly young person. Of course, my parents took us to church, and that was not voluntary.
That wasn't up for discussion.
That was not open for debate. And it's interesting. I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and I will tell you, even though I was there, I'm not sure that I had a deep connection, because there was a lot of ceremony. But was baptized. We had a ceremony where you were christened and accepted and all of that. But that was always a deep foundational thing, because I knew that there had to be a God, just given all of the things that were going on around us. And I was always curious about what is this earth, and what are all of the wonderful, and how did it happen, and how did it get created, and this, that, and the other. Fast forward, went on to college, Fisk University.
Where are you from, Renee?
I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida.
Jacksonville, Florida.
Yeah.
And what was the name of that church?
The name of the church was St. Philip's Episcopal Church.
Oh.
Black church.
Yep.
Of course, during that time, Jacksonville was segregated. And so the notion that black folks and white folks would do anything together was, very hardwired into the life of being in the South.
Right.
I'll never forget, we went to the beach one time, went down to Miami Beach. And this struck me because it was so powerful. There was a sign sitting up at the beach, and it said, excuse the inappropriate language,
Sure.
but it is what it is. They said, no Jews, no niggers, no dogs allowed.
Wow.
Okay. And the other thing that occurred is about when I was in middle school, they closed all the public pools because there was a mandate that said the pools would be integrated. Now, you know how hot it is, just like it's hot today? It was that hot in Jacksonville, Florida. They shut both the white pools down and, at the time, colored pools across the city. And that was millions and millions of dollars of investment, but that's hard. That's how hardwired it was. But I'll say this about my parents, and I am going to finish quickly. The black community was so resilient that never once did I have the impression that we were being deprived of anything. And, this whole notion of mixed income communities that we actually were implemented during my term at the Housing Authority, that's the kind of community that we grew up in. So next door were school teachers, pharmacists, architects, the whole span. But everyone was committed to taking care of the children in the neighborhood. So, like if you did anything that was a little bit off track, your parents knew that before you got home. You always wondered, what in the world happened? But fast forward, so I went on to college. I will admit, I didn't go to church as often, but I did visit the church. And I visited different types of churches. I went to an Islamic temple. I went to a Jewish temple. I went to, some of the Buddhist temples. Went to all different types of Christian churches, staying connected but not joining. And it was only when I joined Ebenezer Baptist Church. First, when I moved to Atlanta, I joined Cascade United Methodist Church. And when they had a major change in leadership, I never connected. But I will say that when I joined this church, it all came together for me. And I think that is in part, and it's going to sound like I'm, playing favorites, but your ability to talk about the theological command and demand of the black church in America and how it positions and how it prepares really resonated with me. And I have learned more about theology and the connections and the importance, and I'm able to be a little bit more articulate about the importance of the black church in such powerful ways. But I could go on, and nobody wants to hear all that.
Of course, that's why we're here we're here to hear. Great. So it's you're introduced early on to the faith. Mm-hmm. By parents who insisted that you go to church.
Absolutely.
And you grew up in the Episcopalian church.
That's right. That's right.
And like a lot of people, took a little bit of a vacation during college.
That is correct.
And vacation and some exploration.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
good. All of that's good.
Yeah.
And then it all came together at some point.
Right.
Great. Great. Thank you. You want to talk about your faith, Brother Womack?
It's my honor to talk about my faith, but first let me express the admiration that I have for the two of you. Renee, I've observed you and watched you for many years and how you led difficult challenges around housing issues here in this city, and you did it with grace and with class and with vigor to get things done. I mean, in my involvement with Eastlake, I know there's a lot of people who take credit for this revitalization that has occurred there, but I know the work that you did with Egbert and a bunch of people to make Eastlake what it is today, and I thank you for that. And Reverend, you and I have been together for a long time, so we've been on a wonderful journey. My faith journey, I mean, started when I was at my early days of life. My grandmother was the mother of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church in Greenville, and so the church was a stable part of my life, was an essential part of my life, was a place where I spent a lot of my time. And the other wonderful thing about my grandmother being the mother of the church was she prepared communion. And so she prepared the bread every Saturday night. I mean, she baked it, she made it, and we crunched it up and broke it up so that it would be distributed in the church, and we prepared the wine, the Welch's grape juice. And so it was always a pleasure that when we come home from church and all that was left over, we had the opportunity to receive a lot of blessings because we got to eat all the leftover bread and drink all the leftover wine. So I consumed a lot of Christ's body and a lot of Christ's blood over the years. So that was my upbringing, and I got baptized at a very early age, simply because one of my dear friends and I was sitting in the back of the church one day, and we nudged each other and said, "Let's go join the church." I mean, it was kind of a dare you, and then we got baptized, and so that was a foundational part of my life in terms of Sunday school and church and 6 p.m. services after on Sunday, and all the Baptist Training Union, the BTU activities, and big meetings. And
you a BTU baby.
I was a BTU baby. Yeah. So the church was a critical part of my upbringing. Yeah, I took a little break during my college days, but then when I moved to Washington, D.C. for my first job, Reverend Henry Gregory in Washington was my first pastor in Washington, and I'll never forget, I was at church one Sunday morning, and actually Daddy King was speaking that Sunday, and I always think the Lord has this incredible way of speaking directly to you, and now you got to be in a place to hear him. And so Daddy King gave this challenge, because this was before I joined the church in D.C. He said, "Some of you may be here this Sunday, you don't have a church home. You may have just moved here from somewhere else or whatever." And he went through the whole litany of references, and I said, he is talking directly to me. And at that moment in time, that's when I joined the church in Washington, and I stayed there, and then I was in D.C. for about 8-9 years, and I moved to Birmingham, Alabama. And that's where I then joined the 6th Avenue Baptist Church with Reverend John Thomas Porter, who just became a wonderful dear friend and a wonderful pastor and he and his entire family. I mean, his wife Dottie and the children and Ivor Williams, just some of the dear friends that I have came from the church, and that's where I met Reverend Warnock, who was a assistant pastor at that time before he went off to Abyssinia and went to theological school. And
I was the intern.
You were the intern, and it was a wonderful church, and the music was so incredible. I mean, it was, and the spirit in the church was so powerful, and I talked to Reverend Warnock every now and then about some of Reverend Porter's sayings and certain things that he would do, and Reverend has put his own spin of it, but he would say, "And I pray for you in your private individual struggles, things that you have to bear that you don't tell your sister or your brother, your mother, your father, but I pray for you in your private individual struggles, because we all have them. We all have private individual struggles that we have to take things to the Lord. And so my faith has been it's an essential part of my life. And I've had on my life journey so many things that I try to explain in a logical, rational, human way, but it doesn't add up. You know, here I am, a young black kid growing up in rural South Alabama in the late 50s and through the 60s, and I sit where I sit now as a chief executive in a private company when I didn't know this kind of stuff existed when I was growing up. I mean, I knew teachers and preachers. I mean, those are my role models. And so for me to try to logically say how I got from point A to point B, I've got to point to my faith. I mean, I know how God has, took me from Alabama to D.C. not knowing where I was going to work and got a job, and how things have transpired through my life, how I've survived bouts of cancer, and and some folks didn't think I'd make it. Doctors didn't think I'd make it, but I'm sitting here to testify and tell my story, and I do it on a regular basis because I know it ain't nothing but God. And so, so I know we'll talk about some things later about how we take faith into my work and into my job, and how that impacts decisions that I make as a leader inside of the company. But no, it's been a critical part of my life, and it's an essential part of my life as I do what I do on a daily basis.
Thank you so much. Wasn't that wonderful? Praise God. Thanks, both of you. Renee, how do you define leadership?
Well, leadership is one of those things that is so critically important. It is more art than science. But I'll say this, you hear several things talked about in terms of leadership, but there are some qualities of being a leader that are critically important. So, tone at the top. Now, what does that mean? That means you have to do what you say, and you can't ask others to do what you are not going to do and model. It's also important that you be willing to be held accountable in terms of the impact and the results. And, there's a lot of discussion about culture, but in addition to what is done, how it's done is critically important. And it's also critically important to care about all of the people. To me, when I first joined the Housing Authority, first question I had is, well, how are the people at the bottom of the organization faring? And this is probably part of that faith journey in terms of making sure that you are caring about the people that you are charged to provide leadership to. And it's a very humbling thing. And I would pray every day that what I was doing was having the right impact. And you can't lead by fear, because if you have to lead by making people afraid of you, then you aren't leading, you're just dictating, and it's all not gonna come together. And building a team who are much more talented than you. That's really the secret, because at the end of the day, in addition to setting the vision and holding yourself and others accountable, the way things get done are picking people who are able to think, contribute, be a part of the team, and making sure that everyone is aligned. And in a simple way, a leader is creating an environment where you can get done things that are important and impactful. And I firmly believe that you must be doing well, but also doing right, That is critical to my faith. And if someone approached me about doing anything that was inappropriate or unethical, that was not negotiable. And so I think it's so important that those types of values are exhibited and done. And I promise you, if you stay within that kind of formula, I think people will be willing to follow you because they know that you're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk. And it makes a huge amount of difference.
Find folks who are more talented than you.
Absolutely.
And put them on your team.
Absolutely.
So you have to be secure to be an effective leader.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because insecurity only leads to distrust or discomfort. And, the magic in it is really identifying, top talent and then evidencing integrity and a willingness to listen and share and support and
but
all
how
of
do you
those
how do you
things.
find? I'm going to push you a little bit. How do you find that sense of security? Because we live, particularly in the corporate world, it's a dog-eat-dog world. And someone might say, well, you really need to watch your back. So from whence comes the security to get people who may be sharper than you in this or that, while at the same time leading? How do you do that?
Well, the interesting thing is, I think particularly as black folks, we've been put through so many tests and, just the assumption that, black folks are not as capable as other groups. Well, we all know better than that because you've heard this expression that in order for us to be successful and impactful, we have to be twice as good, twice as prepared to make it happen. And that builds a level of security that is important. And you also realize that the only person who you need to seek validation from is your God and not the other people that are around you. Now, of course, you're held to performance standards and all of that, but that's not the end of the story. And so every day when I pray is that I am doing what God wills me to do. And I firmly believe this, that He will prepare you to do and to be able to get done those things that are necessary. But you have to be willing to submit to that faith, and it will lead you through so very, very much.
Amen. You want to add to that?
I will, because I study organizations, and I enjoy organizational theory, and I enjoy institutions and kind of what are their purposes. And so, because sometimes I think we get kind of casual and sometimes even intimidated by what is it an organization, institution is put in place to do. And I think as we remind ourselves that whether it's the church, whether it's the power company, or whether it's the government, as you step back and say what it is we are here to do, and then you work through the process of how do I accomplish those things? What needs to happen to bring people together, to align the resources, to adapt to the external, the internal variables, and when you come to grips with that, I think you put yourself in a position as a leader to then know what it is you must do, and then how is it then you must lead. And it's not necessarily a personal thing. Yeah, you got to put your personal spin on it. But I think as you look at the mission and you clearly communicate what it is we are all here to do, and the commonality in terms of why we come together collectively to do a certain thing, to achieve a certain outcome, you create that purpose, you create that enthusiasm, you create that connectivity, you create that excitement, and you bring people together to then achieve that mission. And you create all the things I think that are essential for everybody to be all they can be, for everybody to understand what their roles are, where everybody understands what skin they have in the game, and how they have an opportunity to grow and be bigger and better, and how their future is going bigger and be brighter, and just working through all those variables that go into running anything that involves more than one person other than yourself, because we have certain different perspectives. And so, but finding that common bond and understanding all of us have different skills and we bring certain different things to the table, and how do you maximize the various skill sets and the various talents that we all have to make this bowl of gumbo, to make this painting just this brilliant work that achieves this mission that we've outlined. And so as we do that, I think it's a big, heavy responsibility that we can never take lightly. But I think it challenges us as a leader to be a real good student, and to how do I keep learning? How do I make sure that I'm on top of the situations that are occurring, and as things change, what is it, how I must shift in terms of what I do, how I must move people in a different way, how I must kind of shift the purpose. And so it's wonderful stuff, and it's a big deal. It's a huge responsibility. And so, yeah, we see good leadership, we see bad leadership. But my thing is, it's something that I never take for granted. I never take it lightly. Yeah, I pray about it, and I look for guidance, I look for wisdom, I look for direction. I'm very humbled by it. But it's something that I think we have to really take seriously in terms of the responsibilities of leadership of any institution, to make sure that we're serving the people, that we're serving the mission, that we're doing the right things in the right way to accomplish what the organization is intended to do. And so it's stuff that I pay attention to, and I enjoy studying and seeing what the outcomes and how the outcomes come about.
This brother is amazing. He's CEO, chairman, and president of Georgia Power. Can I tell me the other thing you're doing?
Yeah.
And because that's not enough, he's working on a PhD right now in
political science.
In political science.
At Clark Atlanta University.
At Clark Atlanta University. Wow. When do you sleep?
I do. I mean, you got to have it. You got to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
So you got to make sure you get it in.
Wow. Yeah. You're doing a PhD. Wow. While running the company. Amazing. I heard the theme that I heard running through both of your comments about leadership. As you were saying, Renee, you've got to find folks who are better than you in some ways. And Chris saying it's about a team. It's not about a personality, a singular personality. It's about building a team. And I don't know if you all remember when, during his presidency, as he was putting his cabinet together, President Obama was talking about putting together a team of rivals, where in some sense, you do what's counterintuitive and certainly risky in a political situation, where you got folks, in the case of his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, somebody he had run against, and put her in this cabinet. And the idea of that iron sharpens iron, and you get the best people you can in all of these areas, and put together a team. In that sense, they had literally been rivals. They'd run against each other. But rival, I guess, in the sense, and he got the idea from Abraham Lincoln.
Absolutely.
But rivals in the sense of we don't always see things exactly the same way, but we get in a room and we're working at it from high principle and purpose and not personality. And certainly there are respective roles, right? There's no kidding. The CEO's role is not the same, I don't know, as the deputy or as somebody else who's on the team, or we don't all have the same roles. No. You all don't, we don't show up here tomorrow morning and expect a sermon from everybody.
No, we expect a sermon from the pastor. That's why.
I mean, I can stay home if y'all want to do that. Imagine. We have respective roles.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And expertise.
Yes.
And
what comes with that is a responsibility.
And responsibility that comes
and
with
it's
that.
And I think sometimes people take it lightly, and I think bad leaders take it lightly now. And when I say it's a responsibility, it's not to make yourself so very, very self-important.
Right.
Okay? But you understand the responsibility in a very humble way. Mm-hmm. And the significance of the responsibility, and recognizing that this responsibility was bestowed upon you by the people.
Right.
And by your faith.
Right.
And you are a leader, but more importantly, you are a servant.
Yeah. If you're out front and you look back and nobody's behind you, you're not leading, you're taking a walk.
You're taking a walk. You're taking a walk all alone.
You're taking a walk. So here, and I want to lift this up before we get further, and you all have already alluded to it. What does Jesus say about leadership? And here's a text that comes to mind for me. Mark chapter 10, verse 42. I'm going to read, I think, from the New Living Translation to make it very, very clear. So Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers in this world, conventional ways of thinking about things." So Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people." Lord it over. "And officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be the servant, or actually the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus takes worldly conceptions of power and turns it on its head. That leadership is not about domination. And that's an important lesson for corporate leaders to understand, for people certainly for political leaders to understand, absolutely for church and faith leaders to understand, that leadership is not about domination. It is about responsibility. It is about stewardship. And when we fail to understand that, we do a whole lot of damage. Even literally we're destroying the earth right now because some have interpreted that text that we're to have dominion as domination. And we lord it over the earth rather than seeing the ways in which all of us are caught up in an ecosystem with things living and things human and not human. We're in an ecosystem even with other beasts and birds and fish. We got to cooperate with the trees to stay here, right? Servant of all, humility. And I think if you're thinking about it right, it does humble you. If you're in charge of something and you're left in charge, you have what, 2.6 million customers?
Yes.
And people are counting on you for, we all just woke up this morning. How many of you, as you leaned over and flipped on the light switch, wondered to yourself, I wonder if it's going to come on? Do you even remember when you hit the light switch? Right? That's what Chris goes to bed worried about at night.
Bible make sure it's always on.
Your job is, so we don't even worry about it.
Right.
I don't even remember when I turned on the light switch, right? And if you're thinking about the magnitude of that, I said light switch, but that's the person, I guess, connected to life support in a hospital or whatever else, all of the things that require electricity. And then creating more and more other forms of power. So if you're thinking about it right, it humbles you. It humbles you. We're going to go to the audience in just a moment. What worries you in this moment?
I mean, there's a lot that worries me. We're I think, in an interesting period of our economy. We're also, I think, in a very interesting dynamic period in our society. And so, as we wrestle with a lot of societal issues, be it race, be it equality, be it just a lot of societal issues, at the same time, we are in, I think, an interesting economic period. And so how we navigate this through to make sure that we're doing best for people is, I think, is very critical how we navigate through this period. And so I know as we looked at this conversation and phrases like compassionate capitalism and a lot of things come up, so it gets to this point of, and in this period of, how do we run our businesses, how do we run our organizations to make sure that we're being responsive to all the needs we have? I mean, whether they're stakeholders or whether they are customers or different constituencies, but for me, it's how do I make sure I'm running a business that is providing some return to people who chose to make investments in my business. At the same time, how do I make sure that as a business concern that I am paying attention to what's happening on the street? And I say this at the company. I mean, for a long time, businesses had the luxury of closing their doors and ward themselves off from what happened on the street and left those things out there. Issues that are happening on the street now are also happening inside of my organization. And so I've got to make sure that I'm making sure I'm dealing with my shareholders, but I'm also being responsive to all the needs of my employees in terms of their health and safety and their and emotional and mental issues that they worry about and their well-being. But I also got to say, what kind of citizen am I being in the communities? I mean, how am I helping to deal with issues like homelessness? How am I helping to deal with issues like gentrification? What am I doing with the number of racial and equality issues? I can't ignore those. And so in the midst of running this organization, I've got to be nimble and flexible and concerned to do a lot of different things as we go through this, I think, very interesting period that we live now in this society. So it's a lot, and I worry about it, but I've got to make sure that I stay fully engaged and come up with solutions.
Yeah. What does compassionate capitalism look like?
And for me, it's as I said, it's responding to the needs, all the interested parties, all the involved parties that are part of my organization, that are part of my ecosystem. It's not just focused on the investor, but being a leader, a thought leader, an engaged participant in what happens in the places where I do business, and giving back and investing in and making investments in new ideas and new venture activities, finding ways to grow the economy, finding ways to expand wealth opportunities for different parts of our economic stratus in terms of how do we grow people from poverty up the stream, up to middle class in different stages, and give them that opportunity and saying, okay, I got a role in that. I can't just sit back and try to let that naturally, organically happen. I've got to make sure that I'm investing, that I'm participating in that process. And so when I do that, for me, I feel like that demonstrates my compassion, my consideration to things other than just my bottom line.
Yeah, and I want to add to this conversation because this has always been such a critical issue. And I think that what is missing from society, corporations, churches, and everything is understanding universal humanity. And it's fascinating because we're all packaged differently. You know, so they're white skins, straighter hair, darker hues, no hair, or, you know, hair of more texture. But if you were to cut any human being open, it's the same stuff. And I think that this is a charge that God has presented to us, and we have failed. Because allegedly, the highest form of living being is the human. And what we inevitably do is we point to the differences, not as a matter of beauty and appreciation, but to say, okay, that group goes there, that group goes there, and because we have not embraced universal humanity, we don't educate everyone properly. And when the policy decisions get made, they aren't being made so that humanity can thrive. Everybody's now focused on my team, my tribe, my this, my that. And we are, with incredible disdain and lack of appreciation of humanity, doing things that are destroying entire groups of people. And I think that the big experiment that God is challenging us to do is to get over that insanity. And that's why the focus on diversity is so critically important. It's not so much diversity for diversity's sake. It is really about how can I tap into the incredible talent and creativity and innovation and beauty of humanity. We can look at birds and butterflies and animals and flowers. And it's just, we just go on and the poets go on and on. But how about us human folks? And we gotta stop this, and we gotta figure out how to make it right. And the fact of the matter is that we've made all of the wrong decisions based on all of the wrong things because God packaged us differently so we could appreciate the beauty in each other. And shame on us for being unable, unwilling to do better and to do differently. And if we can get to some sort of universal humanity, a lot of these problems will take care of themselves because, you know, we would be saying, well, this is best for humanity, not black people, not brown people, not Hispanic, non-Hispanic. You know, we got so many categories, and inevitably those categories are not a good thing. They're a way about, well, this one is better than that one, and so on and so forth. So I hope one of my fondest wishes is that before God calls me home, that we will start moving in that direction with a sense of urgency because we are destroying the planet, we're destroying each other. And the second issue that is very problematic is that we are losing the value and importance of truth. There are facts, okay?
There is such a thing as facts.
There are facts, and we need to own them.
Right.
And we've got to come out of this era of insanity, or we will destroy each other.
Yeah. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, not their own facts.
Absolutely.
There are facts in the world. Wow. Amazing, right? I want to push them on two more questions. We're going to go very quickly. I'm going to ask you two more things, and then there may be one or two folks in the audience who want to ask a question. Moral leadership. after January 6th, in the midst of a pandemic, after Buffalo, which is another tragic iteration of something we've seen time and time again, We saw it in a Charleston church back in 2015. We've seen it in so many instances, this hate. We are in a moment where we're witnessing a kind of unadulterated and unembarrassed mendacity, right? There's no sense of what's true and what's alternative facts. Whether you're talking about a corporate leader or a pastor or a political leader or a parent, the leader of the soccer league or the PTA, what does moral leadership look like?
I'll start it out, and I'll tell you what. Some of the things that I spend a lot of time doing now is having a lot of conversations inside the organization about all the things going on, so that whether it's race, and I talk a lot about race inside the company, and it gets uncomfortable for some people, but I have this, I think we have to have discussions about race. And so a part of that process is for us to talk about it, to understand our differences, and to really have these reflective opportunities between different races to try to better understand each other. And then not be afraid to have, one of my lines is to get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations.
I like that. You ought to write that down. Yeah. Get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, because we just, it has been, coming from the colonial periods to the periods of slavery, we have just not gotten comfortable talking about race in this country. And so we've let white people off the hook and in terms of having those kind of discussions because they become uncomfortable, but that's okay. And so from a moral perspective, it's whether it's race, whether it's sexual orientation, no matter what it is, I think the moral responsibility for leadership is to create an environment to have these conversations and not ignore the issues, okay, and provide guidance and direction that we all are going to be respected, that we all are going to be, we're all God's children, and we're going to be respected, we're going to be honored, we're going to be lifted up. And so not afraid to have those conversations and then challenging each of us. And one of the lines that I've embraced a lot lately, I stole it from Denzel Washington, was he talks about don't just aspire to make a living, but aspire to make a difference. And a part of that difference is trying to find ways to bring us together, to have these kind of conversations and create environments for us to get stuff on the table, to come together better collectively and not have to try to minimize this divisiveness that we have, because we're going to have differences of opinion, but how do we peacefully coexist? How do we find those things we have in common? That's one of the things that I think from a foundational standpoint, that moral leadership says, let's confront the tough issues and let's have good conversations. Let's provide environments to have these kind of conversations to help us then move on to something else and to get better. There are a lot of other aspects to it, but that's one of the fundamental things that I think is important for us to have try to create an environment to have peaceful conversations about these difficult issues.
Thank you. Wonderful.
No, the only thing I'll add is, we often use the term, we're all children of God. Well, the fact of the matter is that, for me, that's what universal humanity looks like. And so doing right by everyone, not doing what is expedient, but doing what is right. And this whole notion of doing well and doing good at the same time, that's not just a slogan. That really has to be intentional. And we've got a lot of work to do to help close the gaps. Because I think this whole notion of, well, we don't want to talk about history. Well, if you don't understand your history, you are damned to repeat it. And there's a lot of bad stuff that happened. That does not mean that everyone is, bad. That's just something that has to go into the consideration about coming up with solutions to close those gaps. And so, black folks, and I do believe in universal humanity. And I do also believe very deeply in the fact that God gave everyone unlimited gifts. And the only reason that one group is behind another is that there's something structurally wrong that does not give that group access to education, to support, capital, all of the things. And, if you set something up the right way, then great things will happen. On the other hand, if you instill in a system certain things that will automatically, kick something out, and you don't have access to great education or great opportunities or capital or on and on and on, you can go home, and I promise you, we can all go home and just watch this thing play itself out. So one of the things that leaders have to do is look at those things that have been embedded in the process that are kicking certain folks out, because those things were embedded in order to protect a status quo that, quite frankly, is inappropriate. Because if everyone is not allowed to thrive based on their talents and their investment and their work, there's something wrong. And we are, as leaders, required to address those things, because we have to create an environment where the best is happening for all those who are engaged, involved, and show up. And we got to leave things better than before our being there.
Yeah. So I hear you both saying that structures of inequality don't correct themselves. That in order for injustice to continue, racial injustice, other forms of injustice, you don't have to have people necessarily assemble in a room and cook up some conspiracy. The thing is set up, and you got to be intentional about both creating conversation and disrupting certain systems. Otherwise, you're just going to get
the same outcome.
The same outcome, and in fact, worse.
Worse outcomes.
Worse, right? Because then it gets aided and abetted by technology. We could talk about this in a number of ways, but people assume that when you're dealing with AI, artificial intelligence, when you're dealing with certain algorithms and mathematical formulas, when it comes to the area of criminal justice, for example, it's just the algorithm.
No, but it's
the
inputs.
And the inputs in the algorithms
influence the outcome.
Influence the outcome. So that, and then it has this mysteriousness, this sort of mystery of being objective, and we're seeing those systems actually show up worse, and the racial bias being worse, and the racial profiling showing up worse because of the inputs in the algorithm.
Because of the biasness of the inputs.
Right. So we got to be intentional about disrupting. And the church needs to think about the things that need to be disrupted in the church system to bring it closer to the Christ in whose name we worship and pray and preach, who embodied love and justice. And in ways in which we fall short of that, we've got to be open to uncomfortable conversations. I love that. We ought to leave this place saying, let's get comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. That's a good mantra for the week. Get comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. As we close, one last question for the two of you. And hadn't this been great to hear from both of these amazing leaders and people? And I'm gonna go to the audience, take one or two. Tell me about a moment, and I'm gonna invite you to come in to this as much as you feel comfortable. Tell me about a moment, a season, an incident, an episode, something that happened to you that tested your faith and made you better, made you a better leader, more importantly, made you a better person. And, you know, maybe it had to break you in the process. But God has a way of strengthening us in the broken places and making us better.
I tell you, once again, I'll go back to something. I was listening to a commencement speech that Denzel Washington gave, and so there's a lot of things in there that he spoke to, and one of the things he also spoke to, speaking to, I think it was the UPenn graduate class, and he said, "You're going to fail. You're going to have failure in your life, and it's how do you learn from it? I mean, how do you learn from failure?" And so, and I remember a number of shortcomings that I've had. I remember I went through an organizational process in the company one day and ended up, some people were terminated through it. And I felt horrible. I felt horrible having done that, because how I impacted some people's lives. And so I have, sometimes you got to do those things in the business operations to be more efficient or whatever, but how do you do that with greater humanity? I mean, I've had personal struggles, but I've always felt that God has never given up on me, and I've never given up on God to see me through those challenges. Like I said, I mean, I thought I had less than 6 months left to live back in 2011, and you married my daughter in that same year, and I wasn't certain I would be here for that, but God never gave up on me. 11 years ago, my daughter got married right here in this church that you officiated, and so I had gotten a diagnosis, and I got home, and the worst thing you can do is what? Go look to the internet, okay? And when I read the internet, I got into bed and cried like a baby. I didn't think I was gonna make it, But God never gave up on me. And I know to this day, and I know every day that I never give up on God.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
No, well, I'll just say, you aren't living unless you have tragedies that occur in your life. And, and I think the moments of loss and, failure, I mean, I could lift up several of them, but they test you deeply. And, you say, well, why is this happening? And what did I do wrong? What should I have done differently? And you try to be reflective, but it can be very painful. And so I would say that during those times, the thing that I always fell back on was my faith in God. And I would always ask myself the question, well, what is it that I have done that is not aligned with what I should be doing, so that I can become better? Because if you're not open to that, and that can be a very hard conversation, because we all have some ego, right. And then you say, but that's not the right path. And I will say this, that through it all, and I've made some bad decisions, and I've made some good decisions, I think. You know, the thing that has always carried me through is being prayerful, being thoughtful. And I know this with 100% certainty, as black folks particularly, the only reason that we are here, and you know, Chris is the magnificent leader that he is, and you are the magnificent leader that you are, and all of the things, and I'll include myself in that, thank you. But fact of the matter is that, but for God, okay, but for God, we would not be here. If you think about an era where by law we had no rights, now just drink that in. We had no rights as human beings. Only God could have brought us through. And so it's not an option about believing in God and having faith and something to fall back on. It's a necessity. If you don't have anything else, that is critical, because without it, there's no way that you can navigate this very complicated world and this very complicated life. So I've enjoyed this morning, so thank you.
It's been good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we've been talking about love leadership all morning, leading with love and courage, and the recognition that it's larger than any one of us, including the person who's up front. We're going to go to the audience. Reverend Vaughn?
Yeah, so actually, Pastor, we got a few questions from Ebenezer everywhere today.
Oh, great.
So Des Moines, Iowa, Dallas, Texas.
Yes.
In addition to the metropolitan Atlanta
Wonderful.
region. But member Robert Stevens here in the area, many folks believe they are leading and executing in accordance to their faith and what their faith requires of them as they lead towards fulfilling their business strategic goals. What checks and balances should leaders use to ensure that they are in fact being guided by what God, their faith in God, is leading or guiding them in their roles and responsibilities?
It's a great question.
It's a very good question. And for me, I think it's important for the people that you have around you, that you have sounding boards, you have a network of people that can challenge and question what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I think you have your own moral compass, but I think you also have to make sure that you're getting feedback from others, and that you're assessing yourself on a regular, ongoing basis in terms of how you're performing and the decisions you're making, to make sure you're getting that kind of constant feedback, and feedback from a business sense, but also feedback in a moral sense in terms of how you are performing, and are you kind of meeting that criteria that you set for yourself and for the organization. So for me, a big part of that is the environment you create, but also the kind of people that you have around you to help keep you balanced, to keep you morally aligned with how you're performing in things that you're doing.
One of the other questions from the online community is, what will your legacy be? What do you want your legacy to be?
Mine is having helped somebody along the way, that I looked beyond my own selfish desires, but I was selfless in the work that I did by lifting somebody up and having made a difference. I mean, that's the thing that I care about and think about on a regular basis, to make sure that I am helping somebody, that I am making a difference.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. It's really leaving things better than you found them, and addressing the systemic bias and those systems that have been set up that you could be doing a tremendous job of destruction. But if you don't like the outputs then you have to take the time to figure out, okay, what is going on here that we're getting those types of outcomes and results, and then having the moral courage to raise your hand and say, we're going to do better, we're going to do things differently, because too many people are being left behind, the outputs are wrong, and then stepping up and doing that. And change is very hard. It's very disruptive, and people are often afraid of change, even those situations where the outputs will be better. So having that courage of leadership and willingness to do the things that will leave everyone better than what you found is important, because I promise you, it's amazing. I know, like with the public housing system, where families were being systematically destroyed every single day. Well, the only time that we had any pushback is when we said, we're going to change this.
Right.
And that is what leadership looks like. It's about doing the right things to get better outcomes and better impacts in terms of the people, the country, the systems, and all of those things, and showing up and being prepared to step in the breach and do the right thing.
All right. Well, hasn't this been wonderful? Let's give Chris Womack and Renee Glover a round of applause. Thank you so much, both of you. This has been rich. Wow. And there's so much more we could talk about, which is good. That means we need to continue this conversation about leaders and about leadership. And if you didn't already get it, I want you to recognize and hear us say that there's a way in which all of us are called to be leaders. And all of us are called to be followers too. Depends on the context. And we've got to be in a position and a place to show up, I think, responsibly in both of those roles, as leader, as follower. Sometimes you're both at the same time. And I'm so grateful for these servants of God, members of Ebenezer, who have come to share their wisdom. God bless each and every one of you. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Tomorrow is Missions Sunday at Ebenezer Church. Our worship services are at 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. Will you bow with me in prayer? Gracious God, we give you praise and thanks for this time of conversation, for this opportunity to grow in the faith and to grow in leadership and in wisdom and in stature with God and humanity. Strengthen us now and send us forth in your will. Through Jesus Christ our Lord we pray. Amen. God bless you. Keep the faith and keep looking up.